Imagine a brother who sold another into slavery. He didn't hold a knife, but he cut the bond of blood with a cold suggestion. Let's sell him. He wasn't the oldest. He wasn't the favorite. Just one more among 12, marked by jealousy, silence, and wrong decisions. After that day, he went quiet. He saw his father weep uncontrollably, heard the echoes of the past crying out from the fields, and said nothing. He tried to start over, moved to another land, got married, but guilt traveled with him. And for years, the shadow of that day followed him closely. But then, something changed. The same mouth that once suggested the sale offered his own life in exchange for his younger brother. The traitor became the protector, and before kings and tears, God rewrote his story. This is not just the story of a repentant brother. It's the portrait of all who believe their mistakes disqualify them forever. There is a hidden story behind the life of Judah, a story that begins in pain, passes through betrayal, and ends with the scepter of promise in his hands. You are about to discover why Judah was never just one name among 12. Keep watching to uncover the hidden story of Judah, the man who sold his own brother. Leah's life was never simple. Ever since she was given to Jacob in marriage through deception, she had lived in the shadow of her younger sister, Rachel. Rachel was loved, admired, desired. Leah, on the other hand, was the imposed wife, the one Jacob had never truly chosen. Each day beside Jacob was a mixture of silence, pain, and waiting. Waiting for a glance, a gesture of affection, any sign that her husband saw her as more than just an obligation. But the truth was that Jacob's heart already belonged to someone else, and it wasn't her. Yet even in the midst of rejection, God saw Leah. He noticed her hidden tears, her broken heart, her weary soul fighting for a place that never fully belonged to her. And so her journey into motherhood began, not out of pure joy, but from a silent cry for worth. Her first son she named Reuben, saying, "The Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me now." Genesis 29:32. But Jacob didn't change. Then came the second son, whom she named Simeon, because the Lord heard that I am unloved. The pain continued. The third son, Levi, carried the hope that this time my husband will become attached to me. 3 sons later, Jacob's love had still not been won. Leah was not seen with the tenderness she so deeply longed for. She gave everything, yet remained invisible. Then something extraordinary happened. When the 4th son was born, something shifted within Leah. Maybe she grew tired of waiting. Maybe she realized that seeking value in human eyes was a bottomless pit. Or maybe she finally understood that even if she was rejected by a man, she was cherished by God. She looked at the baby in her arms and with tearful eyes whispered, "This time I will praise the Lord." And she named him Judah. Genesis 29:35. Was a name full of meaning. Judah means praise. For the first time, she did not name her child based on her husband's lack of love. She was no longer trying to prove her worth to Jacob. Her heart, still wounded, chose to look upward. She praised God, not because her life was perfect, but because she knew He saw her. The hidden story of Judah begins in this sacred moment, born of sorrow, yet named with hope. While his brothers bore names of despair and pleading, Judah was marked by worship. That little baby had no idea what was to come. He didn't know his name would be echoed for centuries, that kings would come from his line, that from him the hope of the world would be born. Not even Leah knew that with that simple, courageous act of faith, she was prophesying the future of redemption. The Bible doesn't say much about Judah's early years, but the home he grew up in was filled with tension. The conflicts in Jacob's house didn't disappear. Rachel remained the favorite. Her children, when born, would also be favored, but Judah carried a different name, and that was a sign. In the silence of the tents, Leah raised him with a divided heart, still hurting, but now praising. The boy grew up surrounded by family conflict, rivalry, and competition. Yet his name was a constant reminder that there is something greater than pain. There is purpose. The story of Judah begins this way, as a reflection of his mother's soul, rejected but not forgotten, wounded but strengthened, ignored by men but loved by God. And among all the tribes that would come from Jacob, it was the tribe of Judah that would carry the promise of the scepter, the leadership, the king, and the Redeemer. Yes, this boy, Judah, from the hidden story, born without honor in human eyes, was chosen by God to begin a lineage no one expected. This shows that God's plans do not follow human rules. He chooses the rejected to accomplish the impossible. But who could have imagined that this boy would become part of the family's darkest chapter? Jacob's house was, at the same time, a home and an emotional battlefield. 4 women were tied to the patriarch: Leah, Rachel, Bilhah, and Zilpah. Each one, in her own way, competed for space, attention, and above all, love. It was a large, noisy family, and often silently bitter. Judah grew up in this environment. Even as a child, he learned that simply existing was not enough. One had to fight to be seen. His father's love was clearly focused on Rachel, the favored wife, the woman Jacob had always loved. And even with children around him, the patriarch's heart seemed to see only what came from her. For Leah, this was a constant pain. Though she had given Jacob 4 sons, her worth didn't seem to grow. With every new birth, maybe she hoped for a little more affection, a different look, a change. But Jacob remained the same, and the children felt it. Little Judah noticed when his father lingered longer in Rachel's tent. He saw the gestures, the glances, and grew up understanding that invisible lines divided the household. The sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, Rachel and Leah's maidservants, were also caught in this web. There was a constant power game between the legitimate sons and the sons of the servants. The mothers fed quiet rivalries. It was as if each child represented a banner, a conquest, or a threat. Judah became increasingly observant. From his older brothers, he learned strength. From the younger ones, he understood the fragility of emotion. Every family meal could be an opportunity to show leadership, or a battlefield to sow jealousy. Even without understanding everything, Judah felt he lived inside an unstable structure. His mother's silence often spoke louder than her words. There was pain in her eyes, but there was also a quiet faith, the same faith that once led her to praise God, even without being loved by her husband. It was in this setting that Judah was formed. He grew up learning that love is not always given fairly, that favoritism can wound deeper than harsh words, and that sometimes blood is not enough to unite brothers. Amid this tension, a new name began to be spoken more and more often in the tents: Joseph. He was Rachel's son, handsome, intelligent, and deeply loved by Jacob. From an early age, he received special treatment. His steps were protected, his words valued. When he was still just a boy, he received from his father a long, colorful robe, a gift that spoke without words who the favorite was. For Judah and his brothers, this was a blow. It wasn't just a beautiful garment. It was a symbol of preference, a definitive separation between him and the others. Judah looked at Joseph with a mixture of distrust and discomfort. He knew it wasn't the boy's fault, but he also knew that with so much unspoken pain, it was impossible to pretend it didn't hurt. The atmosphere in the house began to shift. The name Judah, which meant praise, now mingled with feelings that were hard to swallow. His identity, born of sincere worship, was now confronted by the harshness of family life. Even so, Judah didn't stand out as someone who exploded with anger. He observed, he held things in. He took note of preferences, injustices, and his brother's weaknesses, including his own. The hidden story of Judah continued to be written in the silence of his gaze and in the tension of every family meal. There he learned that surviving in that household required more than physical strength. It required wisdom, strategic silence, and perhaps a touch of coldness. But everything was about to get worse, and then a new brother arrived. The one who would change everything. Joseph arrived like a ray of light that outshone the rest. The son of beloved Rachel, he seemed to be the child Jacob had always dreamed of. From a young age, Joseph was surrounded by care and attention. But as he grew, it wasn't just his father's affection that set him apart. It was the way Jacob treated him in front of everyone. While the other sons left early for the fields, Joseph stayed behind. While they sweated through the day's work, he walked among the tents, watching, reporting. It was as if he were protected. He didn't have to try to be seen. He already was. Judah, now older, saw it all. He didn't need to say much. He simply watched. The boy of dreams, as Joseph came to be known among his brothers, was soon to become the center of a storm. It happened when Jacob gave Joseph a long, colorful robe, unlike anything his other sons had ever worn. That garment was more than a gift. It was a banner of favoritism. In every colorful thread of the robe, there was a silent message. This is my special son. The atmosphere in the house worsened. The brothers' eyes filled with envy. Every move Joseph made was met with suspicion, and he didn't help ease it. Joseph began sharing dreams where he stood above them. He dreamed that bundles of grain bowed down before his. Then that the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed before him. Judah listened in silence. His mind worked quietly, his eyes fixed on Joseph with intensity. Unlike Simeon and Levi, who acted on impulse, Judah was calculating. He wasn't driven by outbursts, but by strategy. Jealousy spread like weeds among the brothers. With each of Joseph's words, the air grew more poisonous. Laughter faded. Glances turned cold. There was an invisible tension now impossible to hide, even among the servants. Joseph, perhaps naive or perhaps aware of his place, didn't grasp the depth of the wounds he was causing. Or if he did, he didn't seem to care. Judah, meanwhile, kept his eyes steady. He wasn't the type to explode. He was the type to plan. Jacob's household, already scarred by favoritism, was now a field ripe for crisis. Judah knew that. Words had power, and Joseph's dreams stirred something deeper than pride. They struck at the heart of identity, at the sense of rejection the brothers had carried since childhood. In Judah's mind, memories stirred, his mother crying, his brothers working hard without a single look of gratitude, Jacob's silence in the face of so much injustice. All of it blended with the present moment. Joseph's tunic had become a symbol of a wound that never healed. Judah carried within him a history of rejection, now translated into a bitter question: why him and not us? The praise that gave his name its meaning now felt distant. The hidden story of Judah continued silently, shaping his character in the shadows of jealousy. His mother Leah's faith still echoed in his soul, but the unfolding events were beginning to drown out that song. The atmosphere was heavy. The brothers whispered among themselves. Hatred smoldered like a hidden ember. Until the day came when Jacob sent Joseph to the fields, where the brothers were tending the flocks. It was just a visit, a simple request from the father. But between the lines of that simple gesture, the family's fate was about to shift. Joseph walked on, unaware that on that day he would face the weight of years of buried resentment. And Judah was no longer just a spectator. What do you do with a brother who thinks he's better than everyone else? Before we continue, we'd like to ask for your support. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like to help us reach more people with biblical stories like this one. Now let's continue with the journey of Judah, the man who sold his brother and gave his own life for another. Jacob called Joseph and sent him to his brothers with an apparently simple mission: check on the flocks and bring back news. But for Joseph, that journey would become the beginning of his greatest trial, and for Judah, the darkest turning point in his story. As Joseph walked across the fields, he likely had no idea what awaited him. The tunic he wore, the symbol of his father's favoritism, waved in the wind like a banner that burned in his brother's eyes. Little did he know that his presence would stir not longing, but resentment. Judah saw him first. He recognized his brother from afar, by his posture, his gait, and of course by the colors of the tunic that seemed to shout, "I am the favorite." A heavy silence fell among the brothers. When the others also noticed who was approaching, the atmosphere shifted. Words were exchanged in haste, words poisoned by years of bitterness. "Here comes the dreamer," one of them muttered. Eyes narrowed. The rage, once contained, burst like a broken dam. Dangerous ideas surfaced quickly. "Let's kill him. We'll tell our father he was devoured by a wild beast." It was the perfect moment, far from their father's eyes, far from the family tents. But then, amid the agitation, Judah spoke. He didn't need to shout. His words were dry, firm, rational. "What profit will we gain by killing him? What do we get from that?" The brothers fell silent for a moment. "Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. He is our brother, our own flesh. Let's not shed blood." Judah's words sounded like a clever plan. Anger gave way to convenience. The proposal made sense. They'd get rid of Joseph, they wouldn't be guilty of bloodshed, and they'd even make a profit. It's easier to deal with a guilty conscience when evil wears the mask of logic. When Joseph arrived, he wasn't met with hugs, but with violent hands. He was stripped of his tunic, the symbol of his special place, and thrown into a dry cistern. Judah watched. He didn't intervene. He didn't pity. He just waited. Soon after, a caravan of Ishmaelites approached, merchants on their way to Egypt. The perfect opportunity. The brothers called them over, bargained, and sold Joseph like any ordinary slave, nameless, worthless, defenseless. Judah did not hesitate. The young man was taken away, bound, not understanding why. Joseph's eyes, full of questions and fear, met Judah's for a brief moment, but Judah remained unmoved. It was as if his gaze said, "This is necessary." The payment was made, 20 pieces of silver. The brother who once slept beside them in the tents was now merchandise in a distant market. When the caravan's dust finally settled, the weight of what had happened fell on them all. But no one spoke. Only Judah seemed at peace. The tunic was then stained with goat's blood. They would return home with a tragic tale, but a false one. Jacob would receive the garment as if it were a body, and would mourn like a man who had lost everything. It was cruel, but it was the plan. The voice that was meant to lead with praise led with betrayal. The sound of footsteps was muffled by the dust of the road. None of the brothers spoke. The silver coins were already tucked away, but the weight they carried wasn't in their pockets. It was in their hearts. Joseph's tunic, once a symbol of favoritism and pain, had now become the centerpiece of a cruel lie. The plan had been set in motion. Now it was time to perform. They arrived home before sunset. Jacob was waiting, filled with hope, eager for news from the son he had sent. But instead of Joseph's cheerful voice echoing through the camp, the patriarch was met with tense silence and a blood-stained garment. "We found this in the field. See if it is your son's tunic," they said, handing over the piece of clothing as if it were just any other item. Judah stayed in the background. He said nothing. He only watched. Jacob took the tunic with trembling hands, his eyes locked on the red stains. The fabric was unmistakable, the tunic he himself had given to his beloved son. His face turned pale, his body weakened, a deep groan escaped his mouth. The tears came without warning. Jacob tore his clothes and collapsed to the ground. My son, my Joseph, torn to pieces, dead, he cried, covering his head with ashes and his chest with grief. The entire household gathered around, trying to understand what was happening. The wives tried to console the patriarch, but he refused to listen. His sons approached, all but Joseph, and tried to offer words of comfort, but no voice could pierce the sorrow that had consumed Jacob. Judah watched everything in silence. He saw his father wither in grief, and deep down he knew that pain had a name, it had a cause, and it was alive somewhere in Egypt, weeping just as bitterly as the father who thought he had lost him. But Judah said nothing. Being part of that lie was like carrying an invisible burden on his shoulders. Every step through the house, every look from Jacob, every sigh of longing from his father was like a needle stabbing his conscience. The guilt was never spoken out loud, but it echoed loudly inside him. It was too late to turn back. Joseph's sail couldn't be undone. The lie once told couldn't be taken back, and Jacob's heart was shattered. Days passed, then weeks, and Jacob continued to reject all comfort. Sadness settled over the entire camp. The once strong and active patriarch was now a shadow of the man he had been. He walked little, ate even less, and always returned to the tunic, holding it as if it were a body. Judah, who had once heard from his mother that his name was a praise to God, now fell silent as a co-conspirator in betrayal. The hidden story of Judah continued being written, not with words, but with the weight of silence. The same silence that had allowed Joseph to cry from the cistern without an answer now wrapped Jacob's house like a heavy cloak of shadow. There was no celebration, no joy. The flocks were still tended, the family business carried on, but the spirit of the house had changed. Something had been buried with that lie, and it wasn't just the truth. Judah began to pull away emotionally. He felt out of place among his brothers. They shared the same burden, but each carried it differently. Some tried to forget. Others pretended nothing had happened. But Judah carried it all inside. There were nights when he'd leave the tents and stare at the sky. He remembered Joseph's eyes as he was taken away, Jacob's expression as he held the tunic, the tears Judah never let fall. And he would wonder, will I ever be forgiven? But no one knew the truth. No one but the brothers. And none of them dared to break the pact of silence. Jacob's pain did not lessen, and with it, the weight in Judah's heart only grew. He tried to keep living, but he knew something inside him had broken that day. A piece of his soul had stayed in that cistern. Another had shattered as he watched his father cry out for a son who was still alive, and so Judah began to think about leaving. He needed to breathe. He needed distance. He needed to forget. But guilt is a shadow that never stays quiet for long. After everything, Judah could no longer bear to live under the same roof. The guilt throbbed in his chest like a wound that refused to heal. Watching his father waste away in sorrow day after day, hearing Leah's silent prayers and facing the heavy stares of his brothers had become unbearable. He needed to leave, to breathe away from the memory of the blood-stained tunic, to flee from the shadow of Joseph. And so, Judah made a decision to distance himself. He left his father's house and went to Adullam, a Canaanite region far from the promised land and far from the promises that surrounded Abraham's lineage. There he found a new environment, a new people, and eventually a new woman. The daughter of a man named Shua. Judah took her as his wife. The biblical text records no love, no passion, only that he married her. Perhaps he sought a new beginning, perhaps just distraction. What he truly longed for was to escape the burden he carried on his shoulders, a guilt that even time could not ease. From this marriage came 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. The firstborn, grew quickly, and soon Judah arranged a wife for him, Tamar, a young woman from that region. Judah saw in the formation of a new generation a chance to rebuild. Perhaps by building a new family, he could leave the past behind, but what seemed like a new chapter came with a clear reminder: the past cannot be erased by distance. And pain does not dissolve in silence. The eldest became wicked. Scripture says he was evil in the Lord's sight, and so God took his life. The loss was sudden. Tamar became a widow while still young. Judah's household entered into mourning, a grief not caused by direct guilt, but one that reignited old memories. Judah, following the custom of levirate marriage, the law requiring the younger brother to raise offspring in the name of the deceased, gave Tamar to Onan, his second son, But Onan refused to fulfill his duty. He would lie with Tamar, but would not allow conception, knowing the child would not be counted as his. His selfishness offended God's justice, and like Onan also died. 2 sons dead, 1 daughter-in-law, twice widowed. And Judah, now older, began to be consumed by fear and suspicion. He promised Tamar he would give her his 3rd son, Shelah, once he came of age. But deep down, Judah never intended to keep that promise. He thought to himself, maybe she's the problem. Maybe she brings misfortune to my house. And so, just as he had done with Joseph, Judah chose silence and avoidance. He sent Tamar back to her father's house under the pretense of waiting for Shelah to grow up. It was a subtle way of pushing her away without resolving the issue, a form of escape disguised as caution. The hidden story of Judah continued to be shaped by choices that avoided direct confrontation with truth. He had fled from Jacob. Now he fled from his responsibility as a father and as a man, even with children, even as head of his household. Judah was spiritually distant. He no longer sought the God of his fathers. He no longer invoked promises. His life had become routine, and his faith a distant echo. The praise that had once inspired his name no longer left his lips. His days were marked by survival, not by worship. Tragedy had entered his tent. 2 dead sons, an unfulfilled promise, a disregarded daughter-in-law, and a heart hardened by choices that slowly pulled him further and further from his original purpose. Judah wanted to forget, but life was about to remind him with force that every seed planted will one day sprout. Avoidance does not extinguish. Divine justice and silence sooner or later will be broken. The pain he caused, the deception he upheld, and the guilt he carried were about to collide with a woman who refused to be erased. Tragedy is about to knock on his door. Tamar returned to her father's house with the promise that once Shelah was grown, Judah would call her back to marry him. She obeyed, but in her heart, something broke. There was no honor in that agreement. The lack of sincerity was visible in Judah's eyes. He had no intention of keeping his word. And Tamar, though young, was not naive. She knew what was happening. She had been cast aside, not for something she had done, but for something she had suffered. It was easier for Judah to blame her for the deaths of his sons than to face the truth that both of them had been wicked, and that maybe he himself, as their father, had failed. Tamar spent her days within the silent walls of her father's house. The women of the village whispered about her situation, widow of 2 brothers, promised to a 3rd who would never come. Hope turned to dust, and with it, dignity. Meanwhile, Judah went on with his life. His business thrived, his flocks multiplied, and Shelah became a man. But no invitation was ever sent to Tamar, no word, no sign that the promise would be fulfilled. Judah didn't want to deal with it. He had already lost 2 sons. Deep down, he believed Tamar was some kind of curse, a bad omen. His faith, already distant, now hid behind superstition and convenience. It was easier to forget Tamar than to fulfill his duty. But God does not forget the forgotten, and divine justice, though silent, moves with precision. Tamar, scorned and ignored, refused to let her story end that way. She didn't just wait, she acted. She learned that Judah would be going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. It was a time when he would be away from public eyes, more focused on trade than on caution. She removed her widow's garments, covered her face with a veil, and sat beside the road where Judah would pass. She wasn't seeking revenge, she was seeking justice. She knew she had no voice, not as a forgotten widow. But there, in disguise, she would make Judah look at her. Even if he didn't know it was her, Judah saw her. He didn't recognize her. He assumed she was a shrine prostitute, like many in that region. He approached her, offered himself. Tamar, calm and firm, asked for a pledge, his seal, his cord, and his staff, 3 items that represented his identity, his authority, and his path. He gave them. They were together. Afterward, Judah went on his way. He promised to send a young goat as payment. But when he tried to fulfill that promise through a friend, the woman was nowhere to be found. And since no one knew of any prostitute in that area, Judah decided to forget the whole thing. Better not to be shamed, he said. He buried the mistake in the same silence as always. 3 months passed. Then the news arrived. Tamar was pregnant. Judah was furious. "Burn her!" he demanded. As head of the family, he was still responsible for her. Now he believed his honor had been defiled. But Tamar didn't remain silent. She sent word to Judah, "The father of my child is the man to whom these items belong." And she sent the seal, the cord, and the staff. Those objects, which Judah recognized immediately, were like a mirror held before him. Everything came to light: his hypocrisy, his omission, his cowardice. The woman he had tried to erase revealed his truth, and then Judah said something that changed the course of his story. "She is more righteous than I am." It was the first time Judah publicly admitted a fault. He didn't defend himself. He didn't accuse. He didn't hide behind excuses. He simply acknowledged the truth. Tamar, the forgotten, the silenced, became the instrument of truth. She didn't just expose Judah. She made him see himself. The hidden story of Judah took a turn in that moment. For the first time, his conscience had space to breathe. There was no external punishment, no iron hand from heaven. There was a confrontation, yes, but it was internal, a confrontation that hurt, but also set him free. Tamar went on with her life. She gave birth to twins, Perez and Zerah, and through the line of Perez, King David would one day be born. And from King David, the Messiah. Yes, from the scorned woman and the man who deceived her, God would bring forth the lineage of salvation. Because when pride is broken and truth is accepted, redemption begins to take shape. The woman he deceived would be the one who made him see the truth. Judah went on with his life as if nothing had happened. The episode with the woman on the road, whom he assumed was a prostitute, had been buried beneath the dust of convenience, when he couldn't find her to deliver the promised young. A goat, he told himself it was better to forget. I already sent the payment. I don't want to become a laughingstock. And with that, he turned his back on yet another piece of truth. But time, as always, had its own plan. 3 months later, the news came like thunder. Tamar was pregnant. The word spread quickly. Tamar, Judah's daughter-in-law, twice a widow, was expecting a child. Without having married Shelah, Judah's first reaction was explosive. Indignant, he rose as a judge. "Bring her out, let her be burned." It was a cold, swift, merciless sentence, but it was also a mask. To publicly judge Tamar gave him momentary relief from facing his own conscience. After all, in the eyes of society, he was still the responsible man, the zealous patriarch, the father defending the honor of his house. But Tamar would not be silenced. Before being taken away, she sent a message. She didn't scream. She didn't plead. She simply sent something, the seal, the cord, and the staff. Simple objects, yet they carried identity and authority. They belonged to Judah. They were irrefutable proof that the father of the child was the very man who now called for her death. Along with them, she sent a clear message. By the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant. Please recognize whose these are. The moment struck like a blow to the chest. Judah, in front of everyone, saw the truth he had tried to bury laid bare. There was no denying it now, no way to escape. Tamar, the forgotten, rejected, ignored woman, now stood before him, firm, dignified, holding the truth in her hands. And Judah, surprisingly, did not run. For the first time in the entire biblical narrative, he did what so many men of his generation never dared to do. He took responsibility. With a firm voice, perhaps trembling with shame yet full of recognition, he said, "She is more righteous than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah." These words were more than a confession. They were a turning point. A man who had used silence to deceive now used truth to set himself free. Judah acknowledged not only Tamar's righteousness, but also his own failure, his omission, his sin. Before everyone, he said no more after that. He didn't defend himself. He didn't justify. He simply owned it. And Scripture makes it clear, from that moment on, he never lay with Tamar again. That moment marked a shift. Judah was still the same man who had sold his brother, the same who had deceived his father, the same who had walked away from faith. But now, something had begun to change. For the first time, he looked at himself with honesty. For the first time, his conscience was not silenced. It was heard. And it wasn't just about him. It was about Tamar, a woman who, even without a voice, even when pushed aside and treated as invisible, dared to rise with wisdom. She didn't shout. She didn't seek revenge. She didn't lie. She simply presented the truth and let it speak for itself. Tamar didn't just secure justice for herself, she saved Judah's name. Had he continued down the path of omission and hypocrisy, his story would have ended there, in shame and ruin. But by confronting him, she offered a chance to begin again, and he accepted it. The hidden story of Judah began to unfold from that moment of confrontation. There was no fire from heaven, no angel appearing in a dream. It was a woman, a widow, a forgotten one, who with courage and wisdom brought into the light what he most feared, the truth. And ironically, from this unplanned union, born of deception, came twins. Tamar gave birth to 2 sons, Perez and Zerah. But it was Perez who broke through, the womb first. His name means breakthrough or breach, and it was he who would later enter the genealogy of King David and of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Yes, from the union of a broken man and a rejected woman, God began writing a new line in his redemptive story. Because that's how he works. He uses weakness to show his strength. He uses confession to restore. He uses repentance to transform. Judah was no longer the same. He still had a long road ahead, but a new chapter had begun, one in which he began to become a man, not through power, but through humility. A light had begun to rise, but the path of redemption was still long. Time passed, and Tamar's womb grew. The pregnancy that had begun in scandal was now the center of a promise. That woman, once silent and forgotten, now carried within her a plan she did not fully understand, but one that God had written with perfection. Judah, for his part, remained silent, but it was a new silence, no longer the accomplice of a lie, but the reflection of a heart beginning to bow. When the time came for the birth, something unexpected occurred. Tamar went into labor, and it was revealed she carried not one child, but two. Twins. It was as if God were doubling the sign, multiplying the seed, showing that even from deception he could produce life. During the delivery, the one who extended his hand first was not the one who would be born first. Zerah reached out, and the midwife quickly tied a red thread around his wrist to mark him as the first to appear. But then, something surprising. He pulled his hand back, and the other baby, Perez, came out first. It was a disruption of natural order. The one meant to come second broke through ahead. And this seemingly small detail became prophetic. Tamar looked at the boy who emerged with force, almost as if tearing a way forward, and named him Perez, meaning breakthrough or breach. Judah, who had remained silent for so long, now saw his sons, not the sons of the past, taken by their own wickedness, but these, born from revealed truth, from accepted justice, from humiliation transformed into redemption. God had preserved Judah's name, not because of his merit, not because of a spotless past, because there was no such thing, but because of grace. Judah, the man who sold his own brother, Judah, who deceived his father, Judah, who rejected his daughter-in-law. That same man now saw his lineage continue, and more than that, he saw his lineage accepted by God. The two boys would grow, and from Perez, the Bible later reveals, would come Boaz, from Boaz, Obed, from Obed, Jesse, from Jesse, David, the king after God's own heart, and from David's line would come Jesus, the Savior of the world. It all began here, with a forgotten woman, a humbled man, and two babies born under unexpected circumstances. What seemed like scandal was, in truth, redemption. What looked like a mistake became a symbol of restoration. What appeared to break the law turned out to be the fulfillment of purpose. Judah, a man shaped until then by human decisions, was now caught up in a divine one. He didn't plan this lineage. He didn't seek this outcome. But God, sovereign as ever, used every broken piece of his life to stitch together an eternal plan. The boy born from a rejected mother, the one who had been named Praise, now saw grace take form before his very eyes. And though there was still a path of reconciliation ahead, the first step had been taken, not by the strength of his own will, but by the sovereignty of the God who turns falls into new beginnings. Tamar, for her courage, entered the story of faith, not as a scandal, but as a symbol. A woman who, when silenced, found her voice, who, when despised, revealed justice, who, when used, gave birth to the next link in the promise. And Judah. Judah began to understand that redemption is not about erasing the past, but allowing God to write something new from it. And meanwhile, in Egypt, Joseph's story takes a new turn. Years had passed since the birth of Perez and Zerah. Judah's life seemed to have found a new rhythm, but there was no forgetting. The scars of the betrayal of Joseph, the deception of Jacob, and the justice of Tamar remained. Even though routine kept him busy, memory was a constant reminder that not all debts are paid with time. Some require returning to the point of origin. It was in this setting that famine arrived. The land of Canaan dried up. Crops would no longer sprout. The herds were wasting away. Scarcity invaded the tents like a shadow. And Jacob, now older and more fragile, gathered his sons and said, "I've heard there is grain in Egypt. Go there and buy food so that we may not die." It was the first time in many years that Judah and his brothers would set out together on a mission. They were no longer just shepherds. Now they were heads of their own households, grown men. But they carried a shared past that, though never spoken of, united them through bonds of silence and guilt. 10 brothers departed. Benjamin stayed behind with Jacob. The father could not bear the thought of losing him too. He had already lost Joseph, or so he believed, and Benjamin was now the most precious link to Rachel's memory. So he remained, and Judah, more experienced, more mature, went with the others. They arrived in Egypt, a strange land full of wealth and rules, organized under the authority of a powerful man, second only to Pharaoh. This man, who spoke through interpreters, watched everything with piercing eyes. His face was unfamiliar to them, but to him, the faces kneeling before him were old acquaintances. Joseph recognized them immediately. His brothers, the ones who had sold him, the ones who ripped him from his youth, handed him over as a slave, and plunged their father into sorrow. But he did not reveal himself. Not yet. There was a purpose in his heart, and a wound not yet healed. Judah did not recognize him, nor did the others. That Egyptian figure looked nothing like the brother they had once left bound to an Ishmaelite caravan. But something about the man unsettled them. He accused them of being spies. He asked about their family. He wanted to know if they had more brothers. And when they mentioned Benjamin, he became stern. "Bring this youngest brother to prove you are not lying." They returned to Canaan with sacks of grain and a clear warning: if they wanted more food, they would have to bring Benjamin. Jacob resisted. Fear paralyzed him, but hunger spoke louder. And it was then that Judah, with a new posture, stepped forward. He was no longer the same man who had stood silent as his father collapsed in grief. Now he stood firm and said, "I will be a guarantee for him. If I do not bring him back to you, I will bear the blame before you forever." It was a crucial moment. Reuben had also offered his own sons as collateral, but Jacob had refused. When Judah spoke, there was something different in his voice, something that didn't come only from his lips, but from his heart. A repentant man, a man willing to carry a burden, not run from it. The hidden story of Judah was returning to the center of the narrative, not as the traitor, but as the responsible one. The man who had once proposed a plan that shattered the family was now offering a path to save it. Jacob reluctantly agreed. They prepared gifts, payments, and set out once again, this time with Benjamin, and with him, the tension. Judah's heart beat harder. He knew their fate was on the line, but he also knew his, personally, was being tested. not by the hands of the man on the throne, but by the hands of God. Upon arriving again in Egypt, they were taken to Joseph's house. The ruler received them with a banquet. He saw Benjamin and was moved with emotion, but still kept his identity hidden. They rejoiced. For a moment, they thought the worst was behind them, but they were wrong. The true test was yet to come. The food was running out. The grain brought from Egypt was no longer enough. The mouths in Jacob's household had multiplied, but the supplies were dwindling. Hunger returned, stronger, more urgent, and with it the dilemma Jacob had tried to avoid. The powerful man in Egypt had been clear, "Do not return without your youngest brother." But for Jacob, that demand was like reliving grief. After losing Joseph, to send Benjamin was like surrendering his heart for a second time. Rachel, his beloved, was gone. Benjamin was all that remained of her, the last fragment of an irreplaceable love. The sons knew it, and that's why they hesitated to speak. But hunger pressed in. Lives were at stake. It was then that Judah rose. He didn't speak as before, with cold strategies, nor with the timid caution of someone afraid of confrontation. He spoke as one who had been broken, as one who had lost too much to keep hiding. "If you don't let us go with Benjamin, we will not return." The man warned us, "You shall not see my face unless your youngest brother is with you." Judah's voice cut through the air. It was firm, but full of something new, responsibility. Jacob hesitated. His pain was visible. Every mention of Benjamin pierced him like a thorn, but Judah did not back down. He pressed forward with words that marked a definitive turning point in his journey. "I will be responsible for him. From my hand you may demand him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, I will bear the blame before you all my life." It was more than a commitment, it was a vow. The man who, years earlier, had suggested selling a brother now offered himself as the guarantor of another. The same one who had hidden when his father cried, now promised not to rest until his father was restored. Jacob, seeing the resolve in Judah, perhaps sensing a reflection of true change, gave in. With sorrow in his eyes, he blessed their departure. He sent with them gifts for the man in Egypt, balm, honey, spices, and double the silver, all they had of value. Benjamin left with his brothers. The journey was silent. The now familiar landscape was heavy with anxiety. But Judah did not waver. He knew his word was at stake, and with it, the lives of everyone. Upon arrival, something unexpected. They were brought to the governor's house. They feared a trap. They thought they'd be arrested over the silver that had been returned in their sacks. But instead, they were met with a banquet. Joseph received them kindly. He still did not reveal who he was, but his eyes searched for Benjamin with special attention. When he saw him, his heart was moved. He hurried from the room to weep in secret. He washed his face, composed himself, and returned. During the meal, the brothers were seated in birth order. They were astonished by the detail. And when the food was served, Benjamin's portion was 5 times larger than the others. Judah watched. It stirred memories. Years ago, it had been this kind of favoritism that had fed their envy and led to the family's fall. Now, he saw the youngest brother being favored again, and he waited. He wanted to see how the group would react. But nothing happened. There was no jealousy, no murmuring. It was as if they were all aware of how badly they had failed before and how much they needed to get it right now. Judah was vigilant. He was no longer driven by impulse or convenience. He carried responsibility like a shield. He was there to ensure Benjamin returned, and if necessary, he would do anything to make it happen. But he did not know that the real test was still ahead, that the promise he had made would be tested by fire, that the God who writes stories of redemption does not close chapters without first testing the heart. The meal ended. The sacks were filled again with grain. The brothers prepared to return. Relief, maybe, but a plan was about to unfold, one that would reveal whether Judah had truly changed or whether his new posture was just a mask, because making a promise is easy. Keeping it requires sacrifice. He gave his word, but will he keep it? The sky was still dark when Jacob's sons began their journey home. The supplies were secured, Benjamin was with them, and at last the mood was one of relief. It seemed everything had been resolved. But what they didn't know was that one final test had been prepared, a test that would unearth old ghosts and reveal what had truly changed. Shortly after their departure, the powerful Egyptian man, still unrevealed as Joseph, summoned his servant and gave specific instructions. Fill their sacks with food as before, but this time, hide my silver cup in the youngest one's bag. The trap was set. The caravan had barely left the city when, in the distance, they heard the sound of approaching horses. It was the governor's messenger, his face stern, his voice full of accusation. Why have you repaid good with evil? My master's silver cup has gone missing. It is used for divination and is precious. The brothers were shocked, outraged. They protested with confidence. They had done no such thing. One of them, certain of their innocence, declared, "If any of us is found with that cup, let him die, and the rest of us will become your slaves." But the servant was more measured. He replied, "Whoever is found with the cup will become my slave. The rest of you will go free." Each man dismounted. One by one they opened their sacks. Judah's heart raced, not with suspicion, but with fear. They could not lose Benjamin, not now, not after everything that had been promised. The search went from the eldest to the youngest. And then, in Benjamin's sack, there it was, the silver cup. The silence broke into cries of anguish. The men tore their clothes in despair. Tragedy had fallen on them like an avalanche. They had made a promise. Judah had made a promise. And now the youngest, their father's favorite, was condemned to slavery. Without hesitation, they returned to the palace. Hope now rested in negotiation, in pleading. They all bowed before the governor, not knowing that their knees touched the ground before the very brother they had once sold. Joseph watched them intently. His eyes scanned every expression: fear, shame, desperation. It was as if the entire past stood before him, relived in every gesture. One of the brothers tried to explain, saying that God had uncovered their guilt, perhaps not over the cup, but the ancient guilt, the betrayal never confessed. They offered themselves all as slaves, but Joseph responded, "Far be it from me to punish the innocent. The man with whom the cup was found will stay. The rest may go in peace." And then Judah stepped forward. The man who once advised selling Joseph now stepped into the center of the storm. With a voice steady but heavy with emotion, he began to speak. He spoke of their elderly father, how losing another son would kill him with grief. He spoke of the bond between Jacob and Benjamin, the mourning that had never faded since Joseph's disappearance, and finally he declared, "Let me stay in the young man's place. Let him return with his brothers. I will remain as your slave." It was the same man, but it was a new heart. Judah no longer hid behind others. He no longer suggested ways to escape the problem. Now he embraced the pain, the guilt, and the risk. For the first time, he was willing to pay the price that love demands. The silence that followed was thick. Joseph stared at him. Inside, the wounded brother was confronted with something unexpected: transformation. The one who had betrayed him was now fighting to save. Judah stood in his moment, the moment that could rewrite his story, a story that had begun in deception, but now bowed before redemption. Judah is standing in the moment that may rewrite his story. The palace hall was as silent as a tomb. The weight of the decision hung in the air, almost tangible. The silver cup had been found in Benjamin's sack, the youngest, the most beloved, the last son of Rachel. The sentence seemed sealed. He was to remain a slave in Egypt, but something had changed. Not in the eyes of the mysterious governor, but in the heart of one man, Judah. It was impossible not to remember the past. Years earlier, in the presence of another favored brother, Judah had chosen profit. He suggested selling Joseph, convincing the others that killing him would be pointless. Now, in a similar situation, Judah took a deep breath, not to hide his guilt, but to face it. With slow steps, he approached the throne, no longer proud, no longer cold. His face bore the marks of time, of responsibility, of pain lived and guilt buried for so many years. When he opened his mouth, his voice no longer sounded like that of a shrewd man, but of a broken heart. "My Lord, please let your servant speak. Listen to these words with patience. We are many brothers. We have an old father who already lost a son. Benjamin is all he has left from the woman he so deeply loved. If we return home without him, our father will not survive. He will die of grief." Each word fell like a hammer on the hearts of the brothers who listened, but Judah did not stop. "I gave my word for him. I told my father, if I do not bring him back, I will bear the blame for the rest of my life." He paused briefly. His eyes filled with tears, but he did not look away. "That is why I ask. Let me remain in the boy's place. Let him return with our brothers. Let him go back to our father's arms. But I will stay here as your slave forever." No one breathed. No sound came from the other brothers. That moment was not just a plea, it was a surrender. Judah was not speaking to escape guilt. He was offering himself out of love, love for his father, love for his brother, and perhaps the kind of love that is born only in the heart of someone who has been rescued by pain. It was hard to believe this was the same man, the one who had walked away from his family, who had plunged into reckless choices, who deceived, who kept silent, who ran. Now he had returned, not as the same man, but as someone who had learned, who had fallen and risen, who once lied, but now spoke the truth with his whole soul. Joseph's eyes were fixed on him. No word had yet been spoken, but something was shifting. The silence deepened, as if time itself had paused. Judah remained there, waiting, not for applause, not for reward, simply waiting for justice. even if it cost him his freedom. And in Joseph's soul, in that moment, an avalanche of emotion broke loose. The pain of the past, the abandonment in the pit, the years of slavery, the forgotten days in prison, all seemed to dissolve in the image of a repentant brother, now offering himself as a sacrifice. Judah, the name his mother gave in the midst of sorrow, meaning praise, now finally made sense, because only someone who understands grace can truly praise. Only someone who acknowledges their guilt can offer themselves in another's place. It was as if the pieces were finally falling into place. God's plan, even through so many human failures, was unfolding perfectly. The man who had sold his brother was now ready to give himself for another, and that was the sign that transformation was real. Judah did not know it, but his act would not only save Benjamin, it would also redeem the memory of Joseph, and more. It would open the door for the fulfillment of a promise that would change the course of all human history, because the God of Judah does not choose the perfect. He transforms the willing. Now I understand why his name is Judah. Judah's words still echoed in the tense silence of the Egyptian palace. His brothers stood frozen. The governor of Egypt, that powerful and mysterious man, had just heard the most courageous and broken declaration one could make. Judah, the very one who had sold his brother into slavery years ago, was now offering his own life in exchange for Benjamin's freedom. Joseph remained silent for what felt like an eternity. His eyes were wet. All the weight of the years, of forgotten dreams, half-healed wounds, rested on his shoulders. The pain of abandonment, the emptiness of slavery, the injustice of prison, all of it gained new meaning in that moment. He couldn't hold it in any longer. With a trembling voice and a heart ablaze, he shouted for all the Egyptians to leave the room. The guards, the interpreters, the servants, all exited quickly, startled by the sudden outburst of emotion. Only he and his brothers remained, men marked by bad choices, betrayals, and silences that hurt more than words. But now was the time for truth. Joseph began to weep, not a quiet weeping. It was loud, unrestrained, like the sobs of a child reunited with his mother after a season of fear. His cries were so intense they echoed through the palace corridors. Even the Egyptians at a distance heard them, and then he spoke, for the first time, directly to them, in Hebrew, without an interpreter. "I am Joseph, your brother." Time seemed to stop. The brothers froze. The blood in their veins turned cold. The impossible stood before them. The brother they had discarded like an object, sold as a slave, was now the second most powerful man in Egypt. Joseph stepped forward. "I am Joseph, the brother you sold. But do not be distressed. Do not be afraid or blame yourselves for what you did. It was God who sent me ahead of you to save lives." Joseph's words came not as vengeance, but as healing. He saw through the eyes of faith that every bit of pain had been shaped by God into a greater plan. He didn't minimize the suffering, but he saw beyond it divine purpose. The brothers still didn't know how to react. There was shame, there was fear, but Joseph drew near. He embraced Benjamin first, and the two wept on each other's shoulders. Then, one by one, he embraced his brothers. No accusations, no demands, only embraces, full of grace and reconciliation. And in that moment, Judah, The one who most needed that embrace allowed himself to cry freely. He knew what he had done. He knew the weight he had carried, but in that embrace he felt forgiveness. Not just his brother's forgiveness, but God's. It was the beginning of a new story. Joseph then told them they must return to Canaan, bring their father, and move the entire family to Egypt. There they would live under his protection. They would enjoy the best of the land. He, the one who had been abandoned, would now become their provider. The hidden story of Judah, the man who had sold his own brother, was beginning to transform before the eyes of the world. The one who had fallen so low was now playing a key role in a divine restoration. It was no longer about guilt, but about grace. No longer about the past, but about the future. The reconciliation between the brothers didn't erase the sins, but it redeemed what had once seemed irredeemable. It was as if God himself, through Joseph, was declaring, "Even what was meant for evil I can use for good." Judah said nothing, but his heart rejoiced. He had surrendered himself and had been received. He had risked everything out of love for a brother and had found forgiveness. The one who once walked toward darkness now stood before a light so bright it outshone everything else. The story that began with a blood-stained tunic was now being rewritten, with tears of repentance, sincere embraces, and promises of a redemptive future. But there is still a blessing to come. Something even greater is drawing near. Time had passed since Joseph had revealed himself to his brothers in Egypt. Jacob's family now lived in Goshen, a fertile land granted by Pharaoh. The famine that plagued the region did not touch them, for they were under Joseph's protection. Jacob, now old and sensing that his days were nearing the end, called his sons to bless them. He gathered them around his bed and began to speak, not just farewell words, but prophecies about the future of each one. When it came time for Judah, Jacob looked deeply into his son's eyes. The same son who once suggested selling Joseph now stood before him, transformed. Jacob saw not only his child, but the man he had become. "Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down before you." These words rang with power. Judah, though not the firstborn, would receive honor and leadership. Jacob continued, "Judah is a young lion. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He crouches, he lies down like a lion and like a lioness. Who dares to rouse him?" The image of the lion symbolized strength, courage, and royalty. But the most impactful prophecy was yet to come. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he comes to whom it belongs, and to him shall be the obedience of the nations. These words carried immense prophetic weight. The scepter, symbol of authority and dominion, would remain with Judah until the one to whom it truly belonged arrived, a clear reference to the Messiah, who would descend from Judah's lineage. Jacob went on. He ties his donkey to the vine, his colt to the choicest branch. He washes his garments in wine, his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk. The description painted a picture of abundance, prosperity, and purity, but also carried hints of sacrifice, blood, and redemption. Judah listened in silence. His heart was full of emotion. He remembered his mistakes and failures, but also his transformation. And now, he received a promise far beyond his understanding. After blessing all his sons, Jacob gave instructions for his burial and then passed away. He was buried in the cave of Machpelah alongside his ancestors. The hidden story of Judah, marked by ups and downs, culminated in an eternal promise. From his line would come the Messiah, the Savior, the one who would bring redemption, not just to Israel, but to all nations. The hidden story of Judah comes to a close, but his influence lives on through the centuries. When we look at Judah's life, we don't see a hero from the beginning. On the contrary, what we see is an ordinary man, flawed, who made grave mistakes. A brother who suggested selling Joseph, a son who participated in the lie that broke his father's heart, a man who sought refuge far from his family in choices that distanced him from God. And yet, God chose this man to carry something eternal. Judah's story doesn't end in Egypt, nor in Jacob's tomb. It spans the centuries. In the pages of the New Testament, his name reappears, and this time in a place of honor. Right at the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew, in presenting the genealogy of Jesus, the text declares, Jacob was the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. There he is, not hidden, not erased, but highlighted. Judah, with all his mistakes, all his scars, all his story, included in the lineage of the Son of God. It's as if God were saying, I don't erase stories, I redeem them. The hidden story of Judah, the one that began with rejection and envy, passed through guilt and deception, ends with honor. Judah wasn't perfect, but he was transformed. He didn't start well, but he ended gloriously. God shaped him chapter by chapter until his life became a testimony of redemption. And then, in the last book of the Bible, in Revelation, that promised descendant, the one who carries the eternal scepter, is finally revealed. Not as a baby in Bethlehem, but as a victorious king. The text declares with power, Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah has triumphed. Yes, Jesus, the Son of God, is called the Lion of the tribe of Judah, not of Joseph's tribe, not from the lineage of the sons who seemed more righteous or spiritual, but from the line of Judah, the man who fell, repented, and was transformed. This teaches us something precious. God doesn't choose the strongest, nor the smartest, nor the purest. God chooses those who are willing to be shaped, those who confront their mistakes and allow him to rewrite their story. Those who recognize that alone they are not enough, but in his hands they can become instruments of something eternal. Grace is stronger than the past. The hidden story of Judah is, in truth, a reflection of our own. Who has never failed? Who hasn't carried guilt, silence, or shameful choices? But the same grace that reached Judah is available today. The same voice that forgave, embraced, and restored in Egypt still speaks to our hearts. And here lies an invitation. What part of your story are you still hiding? What chapter from your past do you believe God cannot use? Surrender it, bring it into the light, because when we place our failures in the hands of the Father, he transforms them into testimony. He writes lines of grace where once there was shame. He raises up kings from repentant sinners. The hidden story of Judah shows us that no one is beyond the reach of mercy. If God used this man's life, marked by deceit, downfall, and pain, to bring us the Savior, he can also use your story to impact other lives. May the roar of the Lion of the tribe of Judah echo in your heart. May you discover that your Journey, like Judah's, doesn't have to be marked by failure, but by redemption. If this story touched your heart, check out other videos featuring powerful biblical characters. Click on one, subscribe to the channel, and leave your like. May God keep showing us that He can transform even those with the greatest mistakes, just as He did with Judah.